I always thought of myself as the perfect wife, loyal, supportive, and dedicated to my husband, Daniel. But perfection is often a mask. Beneath it lay years of loneliness and an aching desire for something more. As a senior attorney at a prestigious law firm, I spent most of my days surrounded by driven individuals. And then there was Liam, the new intern. Fresh out of law school, he was ambitious, sharp, and undeniably attractive. At first, I barely noticed him. My days were consumed by cases, deadlines, and endless meetings. But Liam had a charm that was impossible to ignore. His compliments were subtle yet flattering, his smile disarming. "Ms. Harper, your argument in the courtroom today was brilliant," he said one evening, his eyes lingering on mine a moment too long. "Thank you, Liam," I replied, my cheeks flushing slightly. It was the first time in years someone had made me feel seen. Our interactions grew more frequent, more personal. He began staying late to assist with my cases, his dedication impressive. One evening, as we reviewed documents in my office, the conversation drifted from legal strategies to personal dream. "You're incredibly passionate about your work," Liam said, leaning back in his chair. "But do you ever feel like you're missing something?" His question caught me off guard. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. "That's surprising," he said, his gaze steady. "You seem like someone who has it all." His words stayed with me long after he left that night. For the first time, I began questioning everything I thought I wanted. The next evening, we worked late again. The office was quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by the soft glow of desk lamps. As I handed him a file, our hands brushed briefly. The contact was fleeting, yet it sent a jolt through me. "Sorry," I said, pulling my hand away quickly. But Liam didn't move, his gaze fixed on mine. "There's nothing to apologize for," he said softly, his voice steady. I should have looked away, should have ended the moment, but I couldn't. The tension between us was undeniable. "Liam," I began, unsure of what I was about to say. But before I could finish, he stepped closer, the space between us disappearing. "I don't want to cross a line," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't stop thinking about you." My breath hitched at his confession. "Liam, this isn't." "We can't," I stammered, my resolve wavering. He stepped even closer, his gaze locked with mine. "Tell me to stop and I will," he said softly. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, I closed the distance between us, our lips meeting in a hesitant electric kiss. Time seemed to stop as we gave into the moment, the weight of our actions temporarily forgotten. When we finally pulled apart, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. This changes everything," I said, my voice trembling. "It doesn't have to," Liam replied, his hand lightly brushing my arm. "We can keep this between us." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was no going back to the way things were. The next few weeks were a blur of stolen moments and whispered conversations behind closed doors. Every time I saw Liam, my heart raced. The guilt weighed heavily on me, but the pull I felt toward him was irresistible. One evening, as we stayed late again to finalize a case, Liam looked at me with an intensity I couldn't ignore. "You deserve to be happy, Annabelle," he said, using my name with a tenderness that made my chest tighten. "I don't know what I deserve anymore," I admitted, tears welling up in my eyes. "You deserve to be with someone who sees you, who truly values you," he said, his voice steady and sincere. His words struck a chord deep within me. For years, I had felt invisible in my marriage, but Liam made me feel alive again. As I looked into his eyes, I knew I was at a crossroad. The choice I made next would change everything. I reached for his hand, my heart pounding. "I don't know where this will lead," I said honestly, "but I don't want to let it go." Liam's smile was soft, his grip firm as he held my hand. "Then we'll take it one step at a time," he said. As we sat there, the office empty and silent around us, I felt both terrified and exhilarated. This was only the beginning. The next morning, I found it hard to look at myself in the mirror. The guilt was like a heavy weight on my chest. Daniel, my husband, sat at the breakfast table, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "You seem distracted," he said, glancing up from his newspaper. "Is everything okay at work?" Just a lot going on, I replied, forcing a smile. The lie tasted bitter, but I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth. At the office, Liam was waiting for me, his usual confident demeanor replaced with something softer. "We need to talk," he said, pulling me aside into an empty conference room. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart racing. Whatever this is between us, it's not sustainable," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I felt my stomach drop. "Are you saying we should stop?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want to," he admitted. "But I don't want to hurt you either or anyone else." His honesty cut through me, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "I don't know what to do, Liam," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "But I can't imagine my days without you." He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. "You need to figure out what you want, Annabelle. Truly want." His words stayed with me throughout the day, the weight of his gaze lingering in my mind long after he walked away. That evening, I arrived home to find Daniel cooking dinner, something he hadn't done in years. "I thought we could have a nice evening together," he said, his smile warm. I felt a pang of guilt as I sat down, watching him move around the kitchen. He was trying, and it made everything more complicated. As we ate, he asked about my day, his tone light and curious. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of my actions fully sink in. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I realized I couldn't keep living this double life. A decision had to be made. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, determined to talk to Liam. My heart was heavy, but I knew what I had to do. As I approached Liam's desk, I noticed him speaking with another colleague, a younger intern named Sophia. Their laughter echoed in the quiet office, and for a moment, jealousy flared in my chest, catching me off guard. When our eyes met, Liam smiled, but it wasn't the same warm, intimate smile he usually gave me. It felt distant, almost rehearsed. "Good morning, Miss Harper," he said formally as I approached, his tone professional. "Good morning, Liam," I replied, forcing a smile. "Can we talk in private?" He hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Of course," he said, following me into an empty office. "Is something wrong?" he asked, closing the door behind him. I hesitated, my emotions swirling. "I saw you with Sophia," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Liam raised an eyebrow. "She's just a colleague," he replied. "We were discussing a case." "Is that all?" I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my tone. His expression softened. "Annabelle, I care about you, but you're married," he said gently. "This isn't fair to either of us." His words stung, but they weren't wrong. "I know," I said, my voice trembling, "but it doesn't make this any easier." Liam took a step closer, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and resolve. "You need to decide what you want, Annabelle. I can't keep waiting." His words hit me harder than I expected. I nodded slowly, realizing he was right. That evening, I returned home to Daniel, who was in the living room, a small smile on his face. "I made reservations for dinner," he said, his tone cheerful. "Thought we could use some time away from everything." His gesture caught me off guard, and for the first time, I realized how much effort he was making to save our marriage. During dinner, Daniel reminisced about our early days together, his laughter filling the air. For the first time in weeks, I saw a glimpse of the man I had fallen in love with, and it made me question everything. As we left the restaurant, Daniel took my hand. "I know things haven't been perfect," he said, "but I want us to find our way back to each other." Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded. "I want that too," I said softly, my heart heavy with guilt but also hope. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I knew what I had to do. I found Liam in the break room, his expression curious as I approached. "This has to end," I said firmly, my voice steady. "I need to focus on my marriage." Liam looked at me for a long moment before nodding. "I understand," he said, his tone soft. As I walked away, a sense of relief washed over me. For the first time, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. Daniel and I began working on our relationship one step at a time. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I learned that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard. Weeks went by, and while things between Daniel and me improved, the memory of Liam lingered in the back of my mind. One afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. "I hope you're doing well," it read. I knew it was Liam. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. Eventually, I put the phone down without replying. I had made my choice, and I needed to honor it. That evening, as Daniel and I sat on the couch watching a movie, he reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. The temptation to look back was strong, but I knew my future was here with Daniel, rebuilding what we had lost. Love isn't always easy, and neither is forgiveness. But step by step, we found our way back to each other. As for Liam, he became a distant memory, a lesson in what happens when you let yourself stray too far. I realized that sometimes the hardest path is the one worth taking. And for me, that path led me back home. Months later, as Daniel and I celebrated our anniversary, I reflected on how far we had come. The candlelit dinner was intimate, filled with laughter and memories of our early days together. "I'm proud of us," Daniel said, raising his glass. "We've been through so much, and yet here we are." Tears welled up in my eyes as I clinked my glass against his. "I'm proud of us too," I said, my voice thick with emotion. That night, as we danced in the living room to an old favorite song, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for second chances, for love that endures, and for the strength to make things right. While the memory of Liam had faded, the lessons I learned from that chapter of my life remained. I had rediscovered myself in the process, and in doing so, I had rediscovered the love that had always been there. Life isn't perfect, and neither is love. But when you fight for it, it becomes something truly extraordinary. And in Daniel's arms that night, I knew I had found my way back to the life I was always meant to live. As the days turned into years, our marriage grew stronger, built on a foundation of honesty and understanding. Daniel and I made it a point to prioritize each other, to never let the spark between us fade again. We traveled, laughed, and created new memories, leaving behind the pain of the past. Yet, in the quiet moments, I sometimes wondered about Liam, where he was, and what had become of him. Not out of longing, but out of gratitude. He had been a catalyst for change, forcing me to confront truths I had long ignored. One day, while organizing old files at the office, I stumbled upon a photo of the team from Liam's internship days. There he was, smiling confidently among the group. A pang of nostalgia hit me, but it was fleeting. I placed the photo back in the folder, closing it with a sense of finality. That chapter of my life was closed. As I left the office that evening, I felt lighter, knowing that I had finally made peace with my past. When I arrived home, Daniel greeted me with a warm hug. "How was your day?" he asked, his smile genuine. "It was good," I replied, my heart full. And for the first time in a long while, I truly meant it. The choices I had made weren't easy, but they had led me to where I was, a place of love, growth, and true happiness. Years later, as I sat on the porch of our home, I watched Daniel playing with our grandchildren in the garden. The laughter of children filled the air, mingling with the golden glow of the setting sun. Daniel turned to me and waved, his face still carrying that same warm smile that had won me over all those years ago. I waved back, my heart full of a quiet, enduring joy. Life had given us many trials, but we had faced them together. Later that evening, as we sat by the fireplace, Daniel took my hand. "Do you remember our toughest days?" he asked softly. I nodded, the memories flooding back. "I do," I replied, "but I also remember how we came through them stronger than ever." He smiled, squeezing my hand gently. "I wouldn't change a thing," he said. Every moment led us here. Tears filled my eyes as I leaned against him. "Neither would I," I whispered, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The past was no longer a weight I carried, but a story that shaped who I had become. And as the fire crackled softly, I realized that the greatest love stories aren't the perfect ones, they're the ones that endure. As I drifted to sleep that night, I held onto Daniel's hand, knowing that our journey had been worth every challenge. The life we built wasn't perfect, but it was ours, full of love, resilience, and an unbreakable bond. No matter where life had taken us, we always found our way back to each other, and that was enough. I